in another article I read in the Deloitte Insights blog, the edge of cloud, you talked about some of the issues with syncing security and governance with edge devices. So um, I'm curious, like what you said, the tools aren't there, I think is one of the things you said in that. What kind of stuff is missing, and what are some of the opportunities out there that might be out there for companies to solve?
Well, one thing, the funny thing about edge computing is it's a computing system on the edge. And so it could be in someone's mailbox or it could be,
Exactly.
on a telephone pole. And so guess what? People can unbolt it from those things and walk away with it. And so your physical security out there is obviously going to be a challenge moving forward. But the big thing that I was really kind of thinking about was the configuration of these systems, the ability to kind of update them with all the patches and fixes they need to remain secure. So if these things are an extension into itself, they're edge devices because they're in essence, say a digital clone of something I have running in the cloud, and I may have 1,000 of them. Say, things are automating a farm, for example, and that's what I know pretty well because those are edge devices, and they're full-blown computing systems, and they store data, maybe not that valuable data, egg production and things like that. But the reality is, if I'm not able to manage and monitor them and control them and reach them and maintain them and even touch them, then they're going to have some security issues moving forward. If Afra mentioned, people are going to run off with these devices. And so
Right.
we have to think, number one, about what we store on them. And even if we don't think much about what we store on them, you got to remember that these things have access to the backend cloud data. So they have the keys to the kingdom. So they into themselves become kind of an attack vector. So if they're taken over, and say this is something that's a Raspberry Pi, that's not very well secured, and it has access direct to an IP tunnel that goes directly to the backend cloud system, you're in trouble. And even though they didn't hack the cloud, they hacked in this case, the edge device. The security lacking in those devices, still get them into the areas that they shouldn't be getting into. And so we haven't really thought through a lot of this stuff within edge computing. And so, very much like the event surf example you said, we're glad it worked and, we're secure it later. I think people are kind of thinking around edge computing with the same way. And it kind of panics me
Yeah,
because
definitely.
IoT was going to be an attack vector. It still is an attack vector. Here it's edge computing, which, integrated with IoT and separate devices, but we're dealing with full-blown computers versus just sensor data. Sensors are very limited in what they're able to do. And if I hack a sensor, I can't do a lot with that. But if I hack into a full-blown computer with storage and processing and network connectivity, into these back-end systems, which really what edge computings are, that by definition, they're all connected to the back-end data. I can do some damage pretty quick, bring down jet airplanes and things like that. And that's a
Horrifying.
little concerning.
Yeah.
It is horrifying.
Definitely, definitely. I'm curious. So, one of the thoughts that goes behind kind of like you have all this rich data that you can collect and do so many wonderful things with, and useful things. Balancing that with kind of like the security concern of like the principles behind like not collecting excessive data that may not absolutely be necessary, that could be pose as a risk later. Um, with edge devices and cloud, how does that kind of change that balancing act of like, well, I can collect your location all day long, but maybe I don't need to for this application to work. Maybe I just need it, this is the minimum amount of data I need to collect to do the job. How do you balance that with like edge devices and cloud computing? Like, how do you decide what's the right amount of data to collect if you don't have certain assurances on security?
Yeah, and this is a tiering problem. I've been writing and speaking about a ton because we have to figure out what's going to exist on these edge devices and what should exist on the backend cloud. And also we have to tier security on these systems as well. We're going to protect our edge devices a bit differently because there's limited security capabilities on those things because they're much lower powered devices in terms of how we deal with encryption and things
Right.
like that. So it really is a matter of figuring out how you're going to scheme the consumption of information to the edge device and what you're going to store on the edge device. And my guidance to people who are leveraging edge computing now is don't store anything on the edge device that you're not worried about getting hacked and people running away with. So again, egg production data, they can grab one of the Raspberry Pis off, off the chicken coop, and they're not going to, kill the farm. However, if it goes back into an FDA database that happens to produce, farm future information that allows you to make trillions of dollars in a very short period of time through insider trading, that's obviously different protected data. And what we need to do is tier the data in certain ways. And sometimes there's just going to be two tiers, the edge tier and the back tier in the system. That's typically the way it's going to be. The security systems should be completely different. And they should be decoupled, by the way. And so in other words, when you go through a gateway from the edge device into the backend systems, there should be no way for you to tunnel into those systems. And the key management and the certifications and the validation and authentication is occurring from the cloud-based side. So you have to kind of do tricks like that if you're going to, get into this world. But, we just get so excited about this technology.
Yeah.
And people say, well, these edge devices are great because there's no latency and it sits next to the, factory floor robot. It's, it sits in our cars and things like that. And we're able to react and respond directly to the data, and collecting the data seems like a foregone conclusion, and storage is basically free. But if you're not dealing with security, you're going to end up in trouble quick. These things are going to end up being, hacking automobiles and other mobile devices is a real thing.
Yeah.
And the reason is because the exposure of these systems, the underpoweredness of these systems, leaves them vulnerable. Versus these back-end systems, we can, pretty much close them down with pretty sophisticated, security systems. Not so much on the edge-based devices now.